Good evening. We're on lesson 2 tonight, and the title is Explanations of Evil. Just a few quotes before we begin. The first 3 are actually from Cornelius Plantinga, who wrote a book on Not the Way It's Supposed to Be, a breviary of sin. It's a very good read. I would urge anyone who's watching this to pick it up sometimes. And here are his quotes. He said, "People lament evil in the world, but misjudge its true nature because they misjudge its impact upon themselves." What does he mean by that? He means this, that we look at the evil that goes on around us and the problems of evil, and we think, well, that's somebody else's problem, and that is not the way it's supposed to be. And we have this they-them mentality. And many times we forget that we too are in this world and we too have committed sins and that we too can be part of the problem. The next quotation, he says, is actually from Augustine. He says, "Evil is always doomed to borrow, despite itself, from the treasury of virtue." So it borrows from the treasury of virtue. Why? Because to do its worst, it needs to look its best. Evil needs a lot of makeup. And what Augustine meant by that, when we think about evil and you think about the most tragic and awful things, that's not the way that demonic forces or that evil itself wants to be presented. It wants to be presented as sophisticated. It wants to be presented kind of like the virtue signalers today, like the Pharisees of Jesus' day. Jesus called the Pharisees, you'll recall, the children of Satan. And yet they were very dressed up and very religious, very pious, and yet very evil, to the point that they would commit the evil, the ultimate evil, which was crucifying the Son of God. And one more. Evil is the essence of what is not supposed to be. Evil is mutiny against life. Think about that. In 1755, the Lisbon earthquake unleashed seismic forces which equal the power of 32,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The tsunamis, the Earth's quaking surface, the fires that broke out, all of these together killed about 40,000 people. Think about that. The earthquake brought about an even larger impact on the thinking and the theology of the Western world. Until that time, many among the Roman Catholics had talked about that this is the best of all worlds. And next week we're going to talk about that idea. But there was a man who came along who put a voice to what would be the voice of the Enlightenment to a certain extent, not the scientific voice, but one of the philosophical voices, a man by the name of Voltaire. And Voltaire wrote a novel about this, and he entitled it Candide. And in the novel, the character keeps talking about the best of all worlds as he surveys all the evil that has gone on. And the upswing for the Enlightenment and for people even today is that if this is the best God can do, then is God really a good God? Is there even really a God at all if this is the best of all worlds? And so you can see the shift that occurs from the 1800s, not 1800s, but 18th century, the 1700s, the 18th century, and how this seismic shift of thinking was occurring. One of the outcomes of this movement was, several actually, deism. The deists, many of them were founders of this country, began to believe that God was the God who created everything, but that he was kind of a hands-off God, and that he watched more or less from a distance, that everything was wound up like a timepiece. And then God watched everything. And so at the end of the day, if there was life after this, then what mattered was virtue and good deeds outweighing bad character and bad deeds and vice. And then there was not only the deist, but then the atheist who didn't believe in God at all. And both of these groups, I want you to understand, deified God. That is, they took away God's godness. God is domesticated. Philosophers such as Descartes, who came up with cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, brought man instead of God to the center of the universe. Instead of God being the measurement of all things, man becomes the measurement of all things. Now you may think that doesn't have a very large impact, but actually it does. When you make man the center, when you make man the judge, when you make man the ultimate measurement of morality, then you have sawn the legs off the chair, so to speak, of the whole moral universe. Well, you might ask, what does this have to do with explaining what evil is? Well, a great deal. October the 24th, 1994, Susan Smith, you might have heard of this story, drove her car off a boat landing into the John B. Long Lake with two of her children trapped inside. At first she tells the story of how her children were kidnapped and taken away and all of this, but soon her story began to unravel, and the police began to suspect that indeed it was she that had committed this awful atrocity. And for most people that seemed evil. It seemed even satanic. But how do you measure such a thing if man is the center of the universe? If in a secular mindset, how do you frame the problem? You either blame God or you deny God altogether. In a Darwinistic Nietzschean worldview, you can't really have a concept of evil because there's no moral absolutes without God. Bertrand Russell and Albert Camus projected that humanity is in a circumstance that leads to unyielding despair. This is called nihilism or nihilism. Richard Dawkins sums up their views in 1995. In this, he says, in a universe of blind physical forces and generic realization, some people are going to get hurt. Other people will get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. As the unhappy poet A.E. Housman put it, for nature, heartless, witless nature, will neither know nor care. Now there's a mindset and a worldview that brings about a lot of hope, isn't it? Indeed, Camus himself wondered why people didn't just commit suicide. That's the product of a nihilistic society, of a nihilistic worldview. In Orwellian language, he says the old language of evil has become a collection of dead metaphors, a dormant language. So the language that was always used, even during modernity, even in some degrees during the Enlightenment, people talked about absolutes. They talked about virtue and vice. And virtue and vice as being things within themselves, as Aristotle saw virtue. And yet now, beyond postmodernism, there's really no standard for evil. Oh, some give stabs at it. For example, Jeffrey Burton Russell defines evil as this: the essence of evil is abuse of a sentient being, a being that can feel pain. Okay, so a sentient being can be a man or an animal. And evil itself is just anything that can cause any person pain. But in a nihilistic worldview, and we see this in our own culture, this cannot be consistent. What about an unborn baby that we know that can feel pain? And yet many people deem that abortion is not murder. So the idea of a sentient being feeling pain is problematic. If it is pain that matters, evil is grasped by the mind immediately and immediately felt by the emotions. It is sensed as a hurt deliberately inflicted. You might think, well, that's a good summary of what we know about evil in our culture today, because evil for people is just something that hurts other people or hurts animals or hurts the planet, even though the planet is not a sentient being. But what's wrong with this summary? What's wrong with this idea? What's wrong is that it sees evil as being referential to people's feelings and people's well-being. It does not see evil, that is moral evil. We're not talking about natural evil right now, but it does not see moral evil as violating a universal and consistent ethical objective standard established by a creator who is over all. It de-gods God and magnifies the creature over the creator. Carl F. H. Henry, I think, sums it up very well. He says, the Creator has not arranged the universe for maximal creaturely happiness. Least of all, if happiness means unruffled ease and self-satisfied contentment. That's what most people think evil is anything that takes away from their happiness or their ease or their self-satisfied contentment. Think about it. But the Creator has not arranged the universe this way. It is rejected by secular man as shocking and unacceptable that God is not for our creaturely comforts and happiness. Mankind is not a violator, but rather he or she is a victim of bad luck or oppressive social constructs. No, that's not the way it is. There's no longer in our society willful sinners or even criminals, just sick people who need therapy and lawyers. The observation of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet prisoner who was in the Gulag for about 8 years and who came to this country later on, he said this. He said, the line separating good from evil passes not through states, not between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. He looked at what he saw in the Gulag, and he looked at what the guards were doing and the oppression that they brought about, and he thought to himself, under different circumstances, I could be that man. The problem, even though it's expressed in states, even though it's expressed in classes and all the rest, but the problem is every human heart, regardless of class, regardless of party, regardless of ethnicity. So when you eliminate God and absolute virtues or standards, you're left to what? Psychological forces? Political situations? Outside electromagnetic forces? Something that produces this nefarious reality of evil that for many brings this sense of dread which they cannot articulate. They cannot describe. Tim Keller said this, one of the things that distinguishes us from animals is that we do not simply squeal under suffering and seek to run from it. We search to find some point in the pain and thereby transcend it. rather than seeing ourselves as helpless cogs in a cruel machine. And this drive to find meaning in suffering is not only dignifying, it is indelible. It's in our hearts, it's in our minds. For without meaning, we die. No wonder nihilists like Camus wonder if life is worth living. So I want us to go into this a little deeper now, and I want us to start with this idea and with this foundation, if you will. I want us to look at what the Scripture says about evil. And we're going to look in Romans, and we're going to start in chapter 1, verse 18. The Bible says this, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, indelible. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that we are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and of four-footed animals and crawling creatures." The language here in the Greek, when he talks about suppressing something, he's not simply saying something like, don't look at it. It's like a large beach ball that you've got in a swimming pool or in the surf. And you're trying to take this beach ball and push it under the water and hold it down. That's what men do with the truth about God. That's what men do with the truth about evil. They not only ignore it, they suppress it because it's written within them. They know these things. They are evident to them. He says in chapter 2, "For when the Gentiles," this is in verse 14, "who do not have the law, do instinctively the things of the law," that is, according to our conscience. Have you ever thought about how universal laws are among cultures like murder and theft? These things are written in the code. Now, your conscience can be conditioned by your culture. There's no doubt about that. We see that in our own culture. But there's certain things that we know are wrong, and so what we do is in our nihilism, in our secularism, we relabel them to make them sound good. And in fact, we take vices and make them virtues. Think about that. Who exchange the truth of God for a lie. That's what we've done. But the Gentiles who do not have the law instinctively do the things of the law. These not having the law are a law unto themselves, in that they show the work of the law written in the hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts alternatively accusing or else defending them. And we see at the end of chapter 1 this downward spiral of sin and evil. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. Remember last week we started in Genesis and everything was good until man sinned. Chapters 1 and 2, everything is good. Then in chapter 3, man sins. And after that, it's not that man tries to find his way back to God. Within 3 chapters, men have become so evil that God is going to destroy the human population of the earth except for Noah and his family. We see it in the birth of Cain. There's this downward spiral. Cain, Lamech. So the Bible talks about evil, and we've talked about moral evil here. It also mentions natural evil. So there are two kinds of evil which is found in the Bible. First of all, there's what is called natural evil. This evil is a result. It's the curse that you find back in chapter 3 where God curses the ground. It's the curse that Paul talks about in Romans 8 when he talks about the whole creation is groaning under the curse. Now this evil called natural evil falls into different categories. Natural disasters such as earthquakes and tornadoes and famine. Accidents, which in most cases are the result of negligence or bad judgment. These include wrecks, falls, injuries on the job, things like that. Illness and disease, cancer or heart disease, things like people getting the shingles, all kinds of diseases. Physical and mental handicaps such as Down syndrome or deformed limbs. Physical toil such as harsh conditions. We talked about Solzhenitsyn a moment ago, how he's worked in the gulags. These kind of conditions can cause psychological weakness and malnutrition, exposure. And again, you see this in both humanity and in the animal world where animals are treated very badly. Natural evil is the universal and indiscriminate consequence of Adam's sin. Again, I want to restate it. I said it at the beginning. I want to restate it again so that you'll get this. Natural evil is the universal and indiscriminate consequence of the curse of Adam's sin. It falls upon all people. No matter your religion, no matter your state in life, no matter your class, no matter your political party, falls upon us all. So we're susceptible to the effects of natural evil. In the Old Testament, we see this in the example of Job. God says that Job's a righteous man. Job did everything he could to worship and to please God, and God said this. And yet, Job was subjected to natural evil, storms, fire, theft, all kinds of things, and then physical disease. It happens to everyone. In the New Testament, two prominent passages, Luke 13, the people were asking Jesus about this tower, the Tower of Siloam. And they said, Lord, why did it fall on those people and killed several people, several dozen people? And Jesus said to these people, he said, don't marvel at the tower falling on those people. Marvel that it didn't fall on you. And then in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, he encounters the blind man, and the disciples automatically ask the question, Lord, who sinned? Was it his father or his mother? And Jesus said, neither one. But this he has been given for the glory of God, because Jesus was going to heal him. And in all these things, God has reasons for doing them. I remember John Piper in his NPR interview years ago when the tsunami hit Thailand, talking about the fact that when something like this happens, when a natural evil happens, even though we question God, the thing is God does millions and millions of things, works millions and millions of purposes out through these natural evils. And something else, when you think about natural evils, we never consider hurricanes to be evil unless they strike land and hurt people. The same is true for tornadoes and forest fires. So natural evil is the consequences of Adam's sin, and it falls upon all people. But then we get to the second evil. This is what we've been talking about in the scriptures tonight, what we saw in Romans 1 and 2 in particular, moral evil. I want to provide you three quotes as we begin to think about this concept of moral evil. First of all, Herman Bavinck. He says, though sin is appalling and many-sided, with untold moral dimensions, at its heart, it is a religious revolt against God. When David took Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, and committed adultery with her and then had Uriah killed in battle as to indirectly murder him, when David was confronted by the prophet with his sin, and he cries out in this penitential prayer in Psalm 51, he says this. He says, I've sinned against these people. No, he doesn't say that. He says, I've sinned against thee, and thee only have I sinned. These people were the collateral damage of his sin against God. Secondly, J.I. Packer, paraphrasing John Owen, sin is oriented against God. It is characterized by disgrace, blasphemy, enmity, hatred, contempt, rebellion, and injury, poison, stench, dung, vomit, polluted blood, plague, pestilence, abominable and detestable. Sin is essentially the resolve, the mad, utterly blameworthy, but nonetheless utterly firm resolve to play God and to fight the real God. Sinners resolve to treat themselves as the center of the universe, and so they keep God at bay on the outer circumference of their lives, just like we read in Romans 1. And finally, by John Calvin, he says this: man's nature is to be a perpetual idol factory. Remember what Paul said in Romans 1 a moment ago? That they forsake the Creator and they worship the creature more than the Creator, making gods. We're idol factories. Why? Because we are in rebellion against God. Jesus describes us in John 3:20 as loving the darkness and shunning the truth. Cornelius Plantinga, we talked about him at the beginning of this, describes the resulting evil that sin brings about as the destruction of shalom, that is, the peace of God. Evil brings chaos into our lives, and our human response to it betrays the state of our souls. Because instead of acknowledging God and confessing our sins, we suppress truth and worship lies. All the while our consciences, which again are culturally conditioned, betray the fact that we do believe in absolute moral standards. We've just bought lies instead of truth. So moral evil is what we're going to focus on as we continue through this course. And we won't forget that men use natural evils to deny God's authority and His existence as well. We discovered in Genesis 1 that God created everything and that He created everything good, including man. So the question is, what went wrong? Augustine explains evil as the privation or corruption of good. It's in his definition and description, it's like this. It's like, what is darkness? Darkness is the absence of light. Without light, there is no such thing as darkness. What is cold? Cold is the absence of heat. Without heat, there is no such thing as cold. Evil perverts what is good. We saw that in chapter 3. When the fruit they were given every fruit to eat except for one. And they chose the one thing. They perverted all that was good, all that was around them, and they substituted it for evil. So we see that evil is, first of all, privation. It does need virtue even to exist. It corrupts what is good. It is like a parasitic disease that uses defects to cause corrupting effects. Evil is therefore, in essence, what is not supposed to be. It is a corruption of the moral order of things, a cancer whose malignancy has spread to every part of life, a form of red-handed mutiny against the way things ought to be. Again, to quote Plantinga. So what is the answer or proposed answers regarding the problem of evil? There are three basic responses to the problem of evil, which I think are with regards to understanding and comprehending the issue. The first two we're going to mention tonight come from the cognoscenti, the people of the world who think they're so smart. And the third comes from the Bible. So we'll mention the first two. First of all, moral nihilism. I was reading in Christensen's book one of the interviews by Ted Bundy. He's taking the life of this woman, and as he is torturing her to death, essentially, he talks to her about nihilism and about how that human beings are no better than animals. You see where evil goes? You see where it goes when you take God out of the equation and you put man as the measure of all things? Nihilism, moral nihilism, is full-on moral relativism. That is, everything's in play, and what matters is what men say that matters. Denies absolute morals. It denies cultural obligations altogether. It is essentially the natural and logical outcome of Darwinism. Only the strong survive. You see the inconsistency when people talk about injustice and unfairness. In a Darwinian world, that really doesn't hold together. It's not rational. Because in a world where only the strong survive, then the weak should be obliterated so that what's left can flourish. That's nihilism. That's what it means. It sees no difference between humans and animals, between humans and inanimate objects. But there are many secularists who can't stomach moral nihilism. David Hume was one of the authors of the idea that morals are not absolutes but preferences, and yet he too thought there had to be some kind of virtue in society in order for society to exist. So these moral realists believe that there are moral judgments and standards, but that they're based on subconscious human psyche that are essentially moral constructs or social constructs. So that through time, what is good and what helps people becomes part of our psyche and part of our evaluation and, valuation of what is actually good and what is not good. What is good and what's evil. The problem is this, and it's put forth by Mitya and the brothers Karamazov when he says to his brother, without God, what is the future life? It means that everything is permitted now. One can do anything. If there is no God, if there's no future life, what does it matter? That's where secularism has brought us. The third thing, and we'll be looking at this, of course, as we go along, this is where we're going to really focus on, is the biblical point of view that says moral and ethical realities are based on our standing before a personal God. That there are objective standards and virtues. There's a such thing as virtue and character that is established by God. We see that in a sense, of course, in his theocracy with Israel. This is what Genesis 2 and 3 refer directly to. The rest of the Bible bears along this plot line. That we are made by God, we are made in his image, and we are accountable to him. We see that in Adam and Eve. We see that in Noah. We see that in Romans 1, where God turns these evil people over to a depraved mind. And ultimately in chapter 2, the wrath of God is going to be unleashed against them. As image bearers, though we're scarred, the image is scarred, it's still there. But as image bearers, we value things like love and virtue and even kindness and justice. Now, we're not capable in our natural state to experience the true nature or reality of these things, but we still have them and we still value them, even though we've come to the point where we try to separate them from their Creator. The chaos of our existence without shalom brings us into constant conflict with ourselves, with each other, and ultimately with God. So next week we're going to explore what are called theodicies, how the Bible explains these things. And again, the Bible doesn't give an explicit defense of God, because the Bible never defends God. It treats God as God. But we're going to look at it, and we're going to look at some that have been put forth through the years, and then we're going to settle on one that we are going to teach the last 3 lessons. So we'll be looking forward to that next week. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you have learned from it as well. Thank you.